I'm your host, Richard Wolff. Been a professor of economics all my adult life, and I currently teach at the New School University in New York City. Let's jump right in here in the middle of April 2016. This last week, we had an announcement from the International Monetary Fund, one of the premier international economic organizations that keeps track of how economies around the world are doing. And their latest report caught everyone's attention because it was the second time in the last 6 or 7 months that the IMF downgraded the rates of growth that are happening around the world in general and in the United States in particular. The second downgrade in a short amount of time. There's no indirect way of making something out of nothing, although I can see that many of the pundits reflecting governments nervous about this kind of information trying their best. Here's what it means. The world economy is slowing down, and everybody is affected by it. The hype and hoopla that the United States would somehow escape the depression in Japan, the economic turmoil in Europe, the slowing down in China, the chaotic conditions of the economies of Asia, Africa, and Latin America that we used to call the Third World. The notion that the United States would somehow escape unscathed from the conflagration of economic downturns that are afflicting all those other parts of the world, and that are all traceable to the crash of 2008 that began and festered first here, is an illusion that we will escape. We aren't escaping, and everything points to economic problems worsening in the next 24 months, if we can even say that after that they'll get better, which of course we cannot know. But there's more here than perhaps meets the eye. We are part of an interconnected economy. Of course, it develops unevenly. We develop unevenly inside the United States in the same way. Parts of this country are now reeling, everything from North Dakota all the way to Texas, because of the fracking disaster and the collapse of the oil prices and so on. They are doing much worse than, say, the two coasts. And the two coasts are doing better than the American South, and so on. Uneven development is the way capitalism works. It's one of the results of not having traditionally understood rational planning, trying to make the different parts catch up with one another, not to get too far out of whack, etc., etc. We don't have economic planning because we have an ideological bias against it. But therefore, we have to live with the chaotic, uneven development of a capitalist economic system, both inside the United States and globally. But with more and more interconnections, that unevenness isn't so much overcome as it is simply shunted around from one part of the world to the other. The first terrible effects of the great crash of 2008 were felt here in the United States, 2008, 2009, even into 2010. The Europeans seemed to gloat over those 2 to 3 years that they were not suffering the kinds of economic downturn afflicting the United States. They stopped gloating in 2010 and 11 as the malaise of the United States spread, as anyone should have seen it would, to Europe. Today, the roles are reversed. Europe is in worse shape than the United States. And the gloating, since folks don't seem to learn much, has then proceeded here as if we would escape what? The transmission from Europe, from Asia, and elsewhere back to the United States in this endless, chaotic, and irrational oscillation from one part of a capitalist world economic system to another. Another economic update that emerged this last week was a report published by the American Medical Association, the premier association of medical professionals in the United States, showing us, as if we needed it, that the latest statistical results prove that the better off you are, the longer you'll live, and that the difference is, in fact, significant. We're talking about years, quite a few years, depending on which precise statistic you look at. but all the statistics agree, if you are better off, you will live longer. Another way to put that, which makes it sharper but is exactly the same point, is that a society that allows fundamental differences between people in terms of great wealth concentrated in some parts of the population, usually a small minority, at the price of enormous economic deprivation for vast swaths of the population at the other end, that is a society that is effectively privileging some people to live a longer life and condemning others not to have access to the resources that would allow them to do it. Inequality is a matter of life and death, as well as all of its other horrible consequences, and the latest report of the American Medical Association leaves no doubt about it whatsoever. Let me go on. I want to talk about a number of other issues that became very important. The fallout continues over the last week, as it did the week before, about what has come to be called the Panama Papers. This exposure of a law firm located in Panama whose practice was to provide shell companies, phony in the sense that they don't produce a good or a service. They're just there to hide money in an obscure country that has very convenient rules and laws that allow you to have a company without revealing who the principals, who the owners of the company are. And this is therefore a way to hide your money. You transfer it from wherever you are to the property of this company located in a foreign country whose owners don't have to be identified, and you have effectively hidden your assets, whether it's a company, whether it's a pile of cash, whether it's gold, whatever. And it turns out, as we have been seeing, that all kinds of government leaders, business leaders, bankers, and others have been taking generous advantage of this law firm's offers to create these companies in Panama. I want to remind everyone that Panama is not alone. Many, many other countries, I've seen estimates as high as 80 countries, offer one or another of this kind of service. Here in the United States, states like Delaware, Nevada, the Dakotas, are also specialists in offering these services, hoping to entice companies and rich people to move their money there, getting a little bit of fee income out of it, and providing the secrecy that's wanted. And as always, one of the consequences of this is you make it easier for criminals to hide the loot that their criminal activity generates for them, and you make it possible for people who want to hide their wealth, their companies, their profits from the tax man to take advantage of the same service, and we know that they do. Well, what is being done about it? The answer is mostly nothing. And the reason is that this is an international problem of capitalism. It is people all over the world generating profits in a capitalist system, mostly people who either are business executives or are owners of businesses or who depend for their incomes upon the capitalist system, as most of us do, one way or another. And so it's what this system generates in the way of scofflaws. People engaged in criminal activity, people seeking to hide, people who don't want to pay taxes. We know from estimates coming out of Europe and from the research of Oxfam in England, which is a major and very well-respected institution for studying these questions, that the amount of taxes not paid around the world is to be estimated in the trillions of dollars. And this is wealthy people and big corporations. And the reason we know that is that the very expenses charged by law firms such as the one exposed in Panama make the kind of hiding that we're talking about way too expensive for 95% of the people and the smaller businesses in the world. So we're talking about big business privileges wealthy people's privileges to not only pay lower tax rates around the country and around the world than everybody else, but to basically hide huge amounts of their wealth from paying any taxes at all. Well, why do we know nothing's going to be done? Because there are too many countries doing it. If you close down one, for example, there was recently really great outrage in Europe about the traditional centuries-old game being played in Switzerland. And so Switzerland had to make adjustments for fear of being the bad guy in Europe and having costly sanctions against them. So they restricted what they did, forcing people to hide money no longer in Switzerland as much as they used to, but to move to, you guessed it, places like Panama. And if Panama, although there's little sign of it, if Panama were to change its lovely laws enabling hiding and secrecy and tax evasion, believe me, there are dozens of other places people can and will move their money. And there's every incentive in the capitalist system for countries, particularly little ones that are poor, to try to offset their condition by offering to hide the money of rich people elsewhere. In the very minutes that the Prime Minister of England, David Cameron, was embarrassed to have the revelations of the Panama Papers indicate that his father had set up these shell companies to hide his assets, and who knows what taxes he evaded. That will take time to figure all that out, if we're ever told. But the Prime Minister had to admit that he benefited from it, had to reveal his tax records in whatever way he chose to make the case that he shouldn't be, as he surely will be, held accountable for using the very mechanisms that he is not supposed to use, that he's supposed to uphold the law against, etc., etc. Well, even as he was saying it, where are some of the places that people hiding money in Panama may have to go if they can't stay in Panama to keep it hidden? Well, they'll just go to the nearby British Virgin Islands, where the same gambit is underway, and the Prime Minister, who said he didn't believe in this, hasn't taken a single iota of a step to prevent British territories around the world from continuing to do the very same thing. If it's disgusting, then I've made it clear to you what's going on. But it doesn't stop there. I caught this last week an example of how the same thing is going on elsewhere so that you can see. It turns out that in the last week of March, that's less than 3 weeks ago, the state legislature of Colorado here in the United States voted down a bill. To be accurate, the Colorado House voted the bill up, but the Colorado Senate killed it. Wow, this is the second year in a row. What would this bill have done? And here you can see just how bad things are. All the bill would have done is to allow there to be a referendum, to allow the people of Colorado in the upcoming November election to be able to vote yes or no for a bill that did the following. The bill says any company in Colorado that has revenue abroad, because the things it makes in Colorado are sold there, the things the Colorado people have helped to develop in that company through tax subsidies, through direct money gains, through developing courses in Colorado schools all the way up to the university level that would help these companies get more productive workers to hire, all the ways that Colorado has helped generate businesses. If those businesses develop a revenue abroad, money that they earn abroad, and if they choose to keep that money they've earned abroad in a bank account abroad under current law, they don't have to pay any taxes on the money that is parked overseas. That's even legal. They don't even have to go to the extent of hiding it, although for other reasons they may well choose to do so. This law would have said, no, 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 you can't escape your fair share of taxes just because you have an account somewhere else in the world and choose to park your money there. You can't do that as an individual in the United States. You have to declare the income you've earned somewhere else and perhaps have parked in a foreign account, and you still have to pay taxes on it. So this would simply make Colorado business conform to what we demand of individuals. But the Colorado businesses didn't want it. Or to be more accurate, Colorado's big businesses didn't want it because for the small businesses located around Colorado, the vast majority of whom have no foreign business and therefore have no foreign accounts and are not the beneficiaries of this peculiar arrangement, they don't care. In fact, they could see that making the big businesses pay taxes on the revenues they hold abroad would generate important revenue for the state of Colorado, enabling it to provide services to people and small businesses they can't now afford. So they kind of supported doing this, but the big businesses prevailed. And so Colorado will not permit, notice this commitment to democracy too, the Colorado legislature will not permit the people of Colorado who voted them into office to vote on whether or not the loophole that is provided for big businesses to shelter foreign income from taxation here in the United States should be continued or not. And so I did a little more research, because this really is like the Panama Papers. This is just another ploy businesses have. If you can't evade taxes by holding your money in a foreign account, well, then go to Panama or the British Virgin Islands or Liechtenstein or Luxembourg and get out of paying your fair share some other way. The world is full of people that will help you do that if you've got enough money to pay for it. So I looked into it further, and here's what I discovered. The District of Columbia and 5 states in the United States, 5 out of 50, actually have laws that require companies with money abroad to pay, and revenue abroad, to pay taxes on that revenue, just like they pay taxes on any other revenue they get from their company that is located in and likely built up over the years in the state of Colorado or in each of these other 5 states. And I thought that you might be interested in the fact that the District of Columbia and 5 other states have already enacted something that the state of Colorado defeated. Here they are: Alaska, Montana, Oregon, Rhode Island, and West Virginia. Now, whatever else you may think, here's something you can know about the District of Columbia and those 5 other states. They are not where the vast majority of major global American corporations are based. In other words, those are states where small businesses are almost the only kind of businesses they have. And so there, the people and the small businesses were strong enough to get a law passed that required big business to pay taxes like everybody else. But in the other 45 out of 50 states, big business has triumphed, as it did in Colorado, to get out of paying states' taxes on their profits. And we know from the Panama Papers how they get out of paying federal taxes on their profits. You see the point. Getting out of paying taxes is the name of the game, and corporations are doing it all the time in a wonderful array of ways.
This is Economic Update with Richard Wolff on listener-supported radio KPFA 94.1 FM. We will return to this program in just a moment. I'm Richard Wolff. It's always my very good pleasure to welcome you back to this radio station and perhaps even to welcome you to your own program.
Well, that's very kind of you, Mitch. So let me start off by wishing KPFA a very happy and valuable 67th birthday. I am proud personally to be associated with KPFA. I couldn't be more satisfied and pleased with the exposure that they and all of you listening have provided to the work I've tried to do. And you know, the first thought that came to me is, having tried to raise money for a variety of causes and across my life, I know that one of the most concerned questions that have come to me have been the concerns of people saying, look, I only have so much to give. I want to give my money to something that will build, that will stay there, that will persevere. And here we are celebrating the proof of what's possible. 67 years of growth, of social impact, of making it possible for so many of us to get our work out to where it can hopefully make a difference. It is a real testimony to what KPFA has been, for it to be in a position to say we have a 67th birthday. And the modest request for $10 a month, it's really more like $100 a month that we should all be thinking about, at least if we could afford it. But I want to just express my appreciation, my enthusiasm. And let me tell a small story. Wednesday night of this last week, on the 13th of April, the Bernie Sanders campaign, strangely in my view, made the decision to call a big rally almost at the last moment in Washington Square, a very historic place in downtown New York. Because I give a monthly talk in a church on that square, the Judson Memorial Church, I happened to be there starting at 5:30 in the evening. Tens of thousands of people came. I haven't seen that kind of activity in the United States for a long time. Then it was 30,000. Then it was 50,000. The streets had to be blocked off for blocks in every direction. It was an amazing display. And this is not about the particularity of Bernie, pro or con. I'm neither endorsing nor asking for that. What I want people to hear is that I learned as I milled around how many of those people have had some contact with Pacifica, with KPFA, with the BAI sister in New York. It was such a wonderful moment to recognize yet again what the social impact of that phenomena is that you all have put together at KPFA. So it's a pleasure for me to add my voice not only to celebrating, but to asking for everyone. Here is a place to put your money where it will really make a powerful social difference. And wow, in the United States today, it could not be more important.
Again, that number is 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-5732, or online at kpfa.org. Again, today, here on our 67th birthday, 67 years on the air, we're asking our folks to become allies to KPFA, and you do that by pledging to this radio station $10 a month. Again, what we will provide for you as a thank you gift from that is this KPFA Ally Speaker Collection, all of the events that KPFA has done around the San Francisco Bay Area for 15 years, from 2001 to 2015, 187 events, hundreds of hours of material from folks like Richard Wolff, as well as Chris Hedges, Cornel West, Angela Davis, Amy Goodman. I mean, the list just goes on forever. Richard Wolff, before we let you get back on the road, you talked about what you saw at Washington Square Park in New York City this week, which was just amazing. Really important election happening next week. The primary in New York, the state of New York, for both the Republicans and Democratic side. And just the importance of right now and what's happening in this country. You talk about Bernie Sanders, but it's not just Bernie Sanders. We're seeing people run really to the far ends of the political spectrum, and it's not just happening here in the United States. It's happening in Europe as well. And really, what this is people are fearful of whether or not they're going to be able to make a living here in the future.
Absolutely. I mean, in the last 3 weeks in France, millions of people in a country with a much smaller population than ours, out in the streets, determined to turn back an effort of the government they elected to make their jobs more difficult, to make their incomes harder to earn. Look at the 36,000 workers at Verizon who have been out on strike this week to say the same thing here. I spoke this afternoon, Thursday on the 14th, at a conference called to deal with the crisis in Puerto Rico, where the 3.5 million people there are beginning to stir because they've been treated sort of like the Greece of the United States has been, and they want to act. People are moving in a way, well, you in your state, with the California State University Teachers organization, forcing a much better contract out of it. This is a society whose economic system is not working and that is threatening. And people are beginning to realize it's time, once again, to fight to make for a better world and even to keep what we have. And at that time, the information, the analysis, the news that KPFA brings is all the more valuable, not only as something to keep abreast of what's happening, but as something that can help shape and orient and educate the very forces for change that are stirring. So it's not only an important institution, it's the right moment historically to be there, to be part of it, and to support it.
All right, folks, again, that number is 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-5732, or online at kpfa.org. Richard Wolff, I appreciate you and your life partner, Harriet Fraud, there with you as well, yes, pulling over and taking a few moments to talk to us today on this very important day for this radio station.
Our pleasure. Happy birthday, 67th, and know that we here on the East Coast are championing and supporting what you are doing. And indeed, my wife, Harriet, who's on the program, she has a word to say if you don't mind, too.
Hello, Harriet.
Happy birthday to you, and so many more to celebrate together.
Harriet, thank you for that.
You're welcome. I'm already celebrating the future.
We celebrate you. Again, that's Harriet Fraud, along with Richard Wolff. I thank you both so much. We now return to Economic Update.
Let's then turn to some of the major topics that need some attention. Over the last 2 or 3 weeks, there have been a great deal of commotion taking Americans back to the bill passed in the 1990s by the Congress and signed by then-President Bill Clinton that basically changed the way this country deals with criminals, prisons, and those people that we as a nation throw into the prisons, those whom we call criminals. I'm not going to go over the controversy. It's in the newspapers. It's in the press. You don't need me for that. What I want to do is look at the economics of all of this, which is what we do on this program. And here I want to be real clear. Something, as I have said many times on this program, something changed fundamentally in the United States in the 1970s. The long history of rising wages that American workers were able, partly through much struggle, to win from a very successful capitalism. Those rising wages for those 150 years, 1820 to 1970, they stopped rising in the 1970s. Capitalists began substituting machines for workers, the computer revolution, and those same capitalists decided they could make much more money by leaving the United States and producing our clothing, our appliances, now it's also our automobiles, in other countries where they could pay workers much lower wages than had been won by workers in the United States. So they left in huge numbers. Between replacing workers with machines like computers and leaving the country, American workers found themselves in a weak position. They could barely hold on to their jobs. They could no longer win wage increases. There were too many workers looking for too few jobs because those jobs had been wiped out either by the computer or by the business leaving for other parts of the world. That was a problem for the American working class, and it's a problem that every layer of that class, from the most educated and the highest paid on down, every part of that working class had a choice. It could have banded together and fought against the system that imposed this suffering on them all. Or they could have fought the different layers against one another. each layer trying to come out of this bad situation less damaged than they might have otherwise by pushing the problem to the workers less educated, less well-off, less well-organized than themselves. Unfortunately, the former strategy was not adopted, partly because the kinds of organized, militant workers had been hounded out of the working class, given a way out of popularity that they might have had by the previous 30 years of this country's history. In any case, the worst problems were posed on the poorest, on the least skilled, the least educated, the least well-organized. That often happens in a layered system, a divided system of the sort capitalism generally generates around the world. So the suffering was worst at the bottom. So it goes. And that started in the 70s, and it got worse in the 80s, and it got worse in the 90s. Growing numbers of people became desperate at the bottom, and they resorted to all kinds of ways, legal and illegal, to cope, to struggle, to get by. It became harder and harder. Some, a minority, but some of those at the bottom turned to criminal activities, and there was a problem in that area, and nobody knew quite what to do with it. There were those who understood, as I'm explaining now, that this was an understandable result of an economic system ending its period of rising wages, imposing on people the kinds of economic difficulties that were the reality of the last 4 years, granted, a reality that was papered over by making believe we were okay as we all borrowed the money to realize the American dream, since wage increases no longer would enable you to do it. But those at the bottom hadn't the resources. So yeah, there was some more criminal activity. Now, we could have reacted, as I say, by understanding that this was a fundamentally economic problem, and you would have been best off by solving it by addressing the problem of unemployment, addressing the problem of low wages, doing everything from public sector jobs to raising the minimum wage. These would have been ways to cope with the situation that would have been sensitive and effective. We didn't go that way. What we began to do, starting already in the 70s, accelerating dramatically in the 80s, and really taking off in the 90s, was a completely different strategy. Incarceration, putting people into jail. If you look at the statistics of what the United States does, for most of the 20th century, we have the same very low rate of incarceration. Starting in the 1970s, that number turns up and becomes wild. We put people into jails and prisons in a way we never did before as a nation. Those are the years in which we become, which we are today, the country that imprisons a higher percentage of its people than any other country on the planet. And number two isn't close. Wow. We tried to solve a fundamental economic problem, and how our system works, how it penalizes more and more those who are least able to get through the situation, who start off before the crisis hits already the least favored. We squash them. Sort of like what I said in the first half of today's programs about what is being done to the Puerto Rican people in Puerto Rico right now. Same story. Same story. Well, we put everybody in jail. And that, in a way, is the most irrational act of a society that has an obsession with never questioning the system, never changing the system, always thinking that any solution is better than saying, hey, our economic system isn't working very well and we have to change it. That is the taboo, or at least it was until recently.
And we are listening to Economic Update with Richard Wolff. Again, I'm Mitch Jeserich coming to you from the studios of KPFA.
We didn't have anything like the incarceration reaction to the collapse of the 1930s because we didn't have the mentality then that we have now. and the incarceration epidemic, so terrible, particularly for the African American and Hispanic American parts of our population, has been a result we didn't need to have. As if to drive the point home, let me show you another way that the economic downturns of the 1970s and how they have not been addressed in this country to this moment, leaving the rich to get richer as the difficulties of the middle and the bottom simply accumulate. I'm going to talk about another group of people, not in this case incarcerated persons, has been radically shaped and reshaped. And this might surprise you. This is about what is called the sugar baby phenomena in the United States, something that Dr. Harriet Fraad, in her interviews on this program in recent weeks, also mentioned. What are sugar babies? These are young college students, mostly women, who are having more and more difficulty getting through the payments to go to college. We've allowed a college education to become more and more expensive. If you look at the price of a college education, it has risen faster than the cost of living over recent decades. We have made it basically impossible for most young people in most American families to afford higher education. That has led many to get into debts of $50, $100, $150, or more thousands of dollars, burdening them for the rest of their lives. Wow. And so some young people decided to solve this absurd problem. Education needed more than ever to get a decent job, costing more than ever, and coming at a time when economic difficulties make most families have a harder and harder time. They didn't want to go into debt. Who could blame them? So they entered into a relationship which we now call sugar baby. Here's what it is. A young person, again, mostly young women, agreed to be a companion to whom? To a traveling business executive or someone else who has a lot of money. And the deal is this person pays for the young student's room, maybe pays for their board, maybe covers the tuition payments to the high-priced college or university, and in exchange, the young lady is a ready and a willing and available companion, someone for the businessman when he comes to town to go on his arm around the evening's events. What else is arranged between them, I don't know, and I won't discuss, and you don't need me to spell out. Is that awful? Sure it is. Does it come out of the desire of these two people? Hardly. This is explained by the impossible economic burden put by this society on college students. It's really the parallel to the impossible burdens put on unemployed or low-paid people, so disproportionately African American and Hispanic American, even though white Americans are, in the end, just as vulnerable. Those at the bottom, imposed on and finding their way into the jails. Those not on the bottom, but becoming sugar babies, rather than focusing on what ought to be their extracurricular activities as they go through our colleges and universities. Is this a sign of a system that's working well? Is this the sign of an economic system whose efficiency we should celebrate? The question answers itself.
Just a quick update here on KPFA's 67th birthday, born 67 years ago this day, and we are attempting to raise a little money for the radio station to keep it whole and to keep it well here on his 67th birthday. And last time I talked to you, I told you we had a challenge of $800 from Alan in Alameda and Donald in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And so far, we have raised $250 towards that $800 challenge. If we can get to that $800 number, Alan and Donald will throw in $800, and that will mean $1,600 $100 in our efforts this hour with Economic Update. Again, my pledge has always been to you that we'll bring you the show as it is if we're able to reach that $3,000 goal at the end. Again, what we're looking for this hour are allies. We're looking for folks that can pledge $10 a month to KPFA, and it's a continuing payment that continues on until you tell us to stop, and you could do that anytime. But if you're willing to get on with this program, we will send you the KPFA Ally Speaker Collection. All of the events, when you hear speeches on this radio station, that's what this is about. All the events that KPFA has done over the past 15 years, a number of speeches from Richard Wolff, speeches from the likes of Noam Chomsky, Jeremy Scahill, Eduardo Galeano, Daniel Ellsberg, Rachel Maddow, Thomas Frank. It just goes on and on. It comes on a USB drive. Yours for, again, you become an ally. You tell the phone room volunteer, I want to be an ally, and that is yours for $10 a month. If you just want to get this in one shot, well, we're actually offering it for a $200 pledge. So you can do that too, but we're looking for allies. People are going to be in the trenches with us. The number again, 1-800-439-5732, 1-800-439-5732, or online at kpfa.org. We return to Economic Update.
But today I want to talk about worker cooperatives in terms of what they might have done, not to the capitalist systems of Western Europe, North America, and Japan, which is what I usually talk about, but what the creation of such an enterprise might have done in places that went in a different direction. The Soviet Union, the People's Republic of China. I might have added Cuba, but I can't add Cuba, because in Cuba, this is already underway. The big new change in Cuba has been precisely to move away from the state enterprises that Cuba used to have as their prevailing form, state enterprises which had a group of state officials at the top, functioning pretty much like private boards of directors, and giving orders, etc., to the mass of workers who came to work in the offices, the factories, the fields, and the stores of Cuba. They are now moving to worker co-ops. But that didn't happen in the People's Republic of China in recent decades, and it didn't happen in the Soviet Union for most of its history. So here is what I want to do with you today. Talk about a might have been. Talk about what might have happened. Suppose the revolution in Russia, and likewise the one in China, the revolution in Russia in 1917, the revolution in China in the last years of the 1940s. Suppose those revolutions had not had only the objectives that they announced. And what were those objectives? The objective of the communist revolutionaries in both countries were as follows: to take economic power away from the private individuals who owned and operated the industries of the country and give it over to the state. The idea was the state would represent all the people, and this way all the people would run the enterprises rather than having a tiny minority of wealthy individuals being the owners and the directors. The second big innovation that the revolutionaries were bent on imposing in both countries was to have the government, once again, to be representative of the people, to arrange for the distribution of goods and services once they were produced. It wouldn't be a market system. You wouldn't distribute goods and services to the people who have the money to buy them, more to those with more money, less to those with less money. No, that was denounced as fundamentally unjust, and instead we would have the government distributing goods and services according to some calculus of people's needs. And so the revolutions proceeded. They took the property away from private owners in industry, not in the land, but in industry in Russia. And in China, they did similar things, again with industry, more than with agriculture. They developed what we call the command economy, or a state socialism, or a state capitalism. The basic idea being that the state was going to do for everybody's benefit, run the economy, rather than have it be capitalist in the sense of private individuals owning, operating, and profiting most from the economic system. Well, it did get them economic growth. It did raise the standard of living of the people of Russia and China staggeringly fast, faster than private capitalist countries had done. But it also gave the amount of power to the state that has been a problem in both Russia and China, has been associated with the collapse of Russia and Eastern Europe, and with fundamental shifts and changes in China. So here's the role that worker co-ops could have played. Suppose the revolutions in Russia and China had gone one step further, not only given the state ownership, not only given the state planning authority, but also transforming the enterprises at the base of society into worker co-ops. Then the state would have confronted a working class that owned and operated all the wealth of society. The workers, either as literal owners or as the people on the spot and in charge, so that the state ownerships didn't mean all that much because the workers on the ground had it. You might therefore, and you might thereby, have had a way to control that state, to limit its power, to create a countervailing power at the base of society that would have made the history of Russia and China radically different from what it was, because you had had the daring, the courage, and the determination to go that extra step, the step that's now on history's agenda, but that might have been earlier too. The step of creating workers with the wealth of the society under their control in every business, every factory, every field, every store, and every office. Think about it, because the new direction toward worker co-ops is a response not only to the private capitalisms of Western Europe, North America, and Japan, but likewise to the state capitalisms, the state socialisms, traditional in Russia, China, and so much else of that part of the world. We've come to the end of our program. Thank you very much. I look forward to speaking with you again